What's up, gang? It's time for another episode of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, the show that gives you the tips and tools you need to make yourself stronger, faster, and harder to kill. Picture this. It's 2 a.m. The sky outside is glowing orange from wildfires that are miles away. Your phone blares an evacuation alert. You've been watching the news and it's clear things are moving fast. You've got family, maybe some neighbors, maybe a few friends who are planning to roll out with you. You've packed your bags, you topped off your fuel ahead of time, and you think you're ready. But then you look at the highway and it's already a parking lot. Now what? This is where convoy planning matters. Now, we're not talking about military convoys with gun trucks and armored vehicles, but civilian convoys, family, friends, just normal people trying to get out of danger without adding to the chaos. Today, we're going to break down exactly how to plan, organize, and move as a group when the pressure's on. But before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out to my Substack subscribers. I really appreciate your support for this show. It helps keep the lights on and keeps me going. If you'd like to support the show, just head over to our Substack page, link below, and you can sign up and get exclusive member content as well as all of the other episodes ad-free. So, without further ado, it's time to talk convoy operations for civilians, moving as a group when it counts. It's all on Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, and we're starting right now. All right, and welcome back. I'm your host, Mark, and we're set up for another riveting edition of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast. How's everybody doing? A lot of crazy stuff going on in the news, as always, right? I don't think there's a time where crazy stuff's not happening. It's just the world we're living in today. But I got this idea for convoy operations through a listener who hit me up on X and said, hey, can you do one for convoy planning for civilians? And that's an interesting topic. It's not one that I had even thought about. So thanks for sending that in. I'll tell you my experience with convoys. I don't hold myself to be necessarily an expert on this, but I do have some experience, although it's all military. So we've done convoys during my time in the military just for training operations, just to kind of keep that sharp because convoys are important in military operations. So in training missions, and then also in deployment, we've done some. So let's define what we mean by convoy. I'm not talking about, if we take a couple of vehicles, what we might call LMTV, which are just kind of big military trucks that are troop carriers. If we load up a couple of those, let's say we're taking 20 each, down to the 240 range, right? From cantonment down to the range that's maybe 6 miles away. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about real world, a train of vehicles and trying to move them from point A to point B, keeping them tight and together and supplied with things in case something bad happens. Not just getting attacked, but you have a breakdown, not uncommon with dealing with military vehicles, at least the ones I've had in my unit. So that kind of stuff. So let's get it. That's my experience with it. So I'll just kind of share you with some tips on how we can apply these in a civilian world and why it's so important. So let's be honest. Most people haven't thought about this, but when disasters hit, a lot of folks just assume they can just line up in cars and quote unquote follow the leader. And sometimes it works out. But too often, and we're going to look at a couple of cases where this happened, people can get separated. Cars break down through traffic jams, clogged highway arteries, cars run out of gas, things like that. Someone panics in traffic, and then suddenly a simple evacuation turns into a logistical nightmare. So let's first talk about what is it that when you do a convoy operation right, what does that do for you? And one thing that it does is it provides organization. So one of the key tips as we get in and talk about this that I'm going to harp on that's very important is organization matters, right? Everybody has to know what the plan is. If it's just the leader that knows the plan, and something happens to the leader, then everybody's screwed, right? So oftentimes we would have a brief, or not oftentimes, every time before we'd go off on a convoy, whether training or real world, we would have a briefing before we rolled out, right? So that everybody knew what the route was, what the alternate route was, what the rally points and things like that, what to happen if case of a breakdown or contact was made, all that kind of stuff was briefed. So it's very organized and everybody's on the same page. The other thing that the convoy gives you, which is pretty self-apparent, right, because you're talking about groups, is safety in numbers. So if one family is alone, then they are more vulnerable, right, than 3 or 4 families together that know what they're doing. So there's safety in numbers. And then also it's efficient, right? Fewer delays, fewer mistakes, faster movement, that kind. It helps everybody win. So like I said earlier, this is not just for military guys or contractors and private military companies. There's plenty of reasons why you as a civilian should take a hard look at convoy operations planning. Just think about the news stories we've seen in the past few years. Wildfires ripping through entire towns, tornadoes flattening neighborhoods and destroying homes, hurricanes flooding cities, and even social unrest that's hit our streets in the recent years. So when any disaster strikes, having a plan for moving your people safely and efficiently from point A, from the danger zone, into a place of safety isn't just smart. It really can save lives. So if you think this is just kind of over the top LARPing, kind of things, then I would turn your attention to look at some of the evacuation footage from Hurricane Rita back in 2005. In that, we had a massive gridlock that lasted over 24 hours. Think about that. People ran out of fuel on the side of the highway. Your vehicle's not much good, right? The advantage, as we've said before with vehicles, is it provides you speed and mobility. So it's not really doing you any good if it's run out of gas and inoperable. So planning isn't just paranoia, it's preparation. So let's look at this in more detail. So less than a month after Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, Hurricane Rita threatened Texas and Louisiana in September 2005. The memory of Katrina's destruction that drove between 2.5 to 3 million people to evacuate to the Houston area, right, almost all at the same time, was well in everybody's memory bank. So what followed became the largest traffic jam in U.S. history. So highways turned into parking lots, with some evacuees moving less than 100 miles in 20 hours. Temperatures soared above 100 degrees, cars overheated, fuel ran out, and at least 100 deaths were attributed just to the evacuation. We're not even talking about to the disaster itself. Just on the evacuation, at least 100 people died of heat strokes, accidents, and even a tragic bus fire occurred that was carrying evacuees. So for anyone thinking about convoy operations, Rita shows you why planning matters. A single evacuation route for millions of people trying to get on the roads and get out of Dodge is just not going to work. Convoys that roll out late, without fuel, without supplies, or an understanding of the need to have planned for alternative routes, right, quickly become stranded hazards. So the group who fared the best left early, used secondary highways and back roads, and carried extra fuel and water. Timing, route planning, and self-sufficiency weren't just helpful, they were the life or death factors in these situations. So families who simply followed the crowd ended up stuck in gridlock or separated, while those with alternate routes, rally points, and a clear plan avoided the worst of the chaos. All right, so let's talk about planning your movement in detail. And here's where the backbone of convoy planning comes into play, and that's the acronym PACE. PACE. Now, I've talked about PACE planning in previous episodes. I wrote about it on the blog before, but just as a refresher, PACE stands for P, primary route, right? That's your best option, right? Highways or major roads if they are open. Then A stands for your alternate routes. If a primary route is blocked or jammed, right, you have another route, right, another path to go on. What happens if that one's blocked? Well, then you have C, which is contingency, your contingency route. So slower roads, maybe some back roads or rural routes, right, out on the countryside. And then you have your emergency, emergency route. That's the last resort. So think farm roads, off-road paths, anything, right? Anything that's going to keep you moving, that becomes your emergency route, even if it's not really even a road, right? So primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency, right? You think that PACE planning goes into everything, right? But we're talking within the context of your route planning, right? So we talked about Hurricane Rita. Let me shift over to an earlier hurricane, and that's Hurricane Katrina, which hit the Gulf Coast in August of 2005, as one of the most powerful storms in U.S. history. When the levees failed in New Orleans, 80% of the city flooded, leaving devastation on a massive scale. The evacuation itself quickly became a disaster. Hundreds of thousands of people tried to leave at the same time, and highways jammed almost instantly. Many evacuees, again, common story, ran out of fuel after sitting in traffic for hours in the gridlock, while cell networks crashed under the heavy demand, cutting off communication when it was needed most. I remember I had friends that were down in the New Orleans area. I tried to call them, could not get through when the devastation was happening, right? There just was no communication through the cell network. So families were separated, or some families were separated, because they didn't have clear rally plans other than just drive north, right, and get out of Dodge. So for convoy planning, the lesson is clear. Relying on just one route is a recipe for failure. So during Katrina, interstate, like I said, they became parking lots, people without fuel, food, water, people were stranded for days. Those with alternate routes, rally points, and supplies fared better than just simply following the crowd. And those who didn't end up stuck on the highway, or those were the people who didn't end up stuck on the highway with no food, water, or fuel. So it's very critical that everybody knows the plan. So I talked about that in the briefing under organization, right? Every driver, and just really everybody, I think, but everyone needs some paper maps, right? In case because everybody loves using Google Maps, Apple Maps, and stuff like that. So if your cell phone goes down, if the battery dies, you don't have service, paper maps are something you need in the glove box, right? You need a list of rally points, right? If we get separated or something happens, where will we all link up together? Everybody needs to know that. And then we need some type of redundancy in communications, contact numbers for every driver, if you can use your cell phones and stuff like that. That way, if you get separated, there's no confusion. All right, I'll talk more about that as we go on. So let's look at vehicle routes or roles and loadouts. All right, let's talk about the organization of your convoy. Right, I don't consider 2 vehicles necessarily a convoy. I'm talking about if you've got more vehicles than that. Right, so let's talk about how you line up the vehicles. This is not the only way to do it, but these are just kind of tips that, from what I've seen through my background and experience, that I think works best. So, number 1, let's say you've got a basic 3-vehicle setup. It could look like this. You have your lead vehicle, right? Your lead vehicle is going to have the most experienced driver in there, right? They have the best navigational tools at hand, is going to be with the lead vehicle. And the lead vehicle sets the pace, right? In terms of speed, when the brakes are, where the stops are, things like that. All right. Lead vehicle decides all that. That's why it's called the lead vehicle, right? The key takeaway from there is that's your most experienced person and driver is up there taking charge. Then you have the main body. That's where your family, the supplies, the bulk of your gear, stuff like that is stored and distributed between the main body. So if that's one vehicle sandwiched in between the lead and the rear, or you've got three vehicles sandwiched in between the lead or the rear, doesn't matter. That's considered the main body. And then you have the rear vehicle. The rear vehicle does exactly that. It kind of makes sure it's the rear. It's in the rear with the gear, so to say, and making sure that nobody gets off chart, nobody gets lost. You've got eyes on every vehicle that's up in front of you, and you just kind of keep things kind of tight and locked down in the rear. As far as your loadout, this is where you would put your mechanical tools, extra fuel, medical kits, and very key in this is who are we going to assign to be in the rear vehicle? This needs to be the person who can handle problems and take care of business. So, for instance, if a vehicle in the group breaks down, your mechanic, if you've got one who's savvy with, has got some mechanical skill, that person needs to be in the rear, right? If you got a medical issue, the best person that can take care of that needs to be in the rear. And that makes sense, right? Because if someone in the main body has to pull off to the side or whatever, right, you don't want the person that could fix the problem to be ahead of them. You want them to be in the rear so that they can trail off with that vehicle who's having the problem and can fix it, right? That's your organization at a minimum. Now, if you have more, right? If you have more assets, more people, more vehicles and things like that, you can have additional duties. You can have a scout vehicle if you want, right? This can even be a dude on a motorcycle, really. And in some ways, motorcycles pretty cool because they can weave in and out tight spots in traffic to check things ahead, then go on the shoulder of the road if there's a jam or something and see what's going on, right? They have a lot more mobility than your four-wheel version of a vehicle. So not everybody has that. Doesn't have to be that, a motorcycle, but a scout vehicle, not a bad idea. All right, so you go ahead and check the traffic conditions and can report back if comms allow. If you don't have that, then that may be more problem than it's worth. So again, it all comes down to comms. Comms allows you more flexibility in your planning. So it's pretty important that you button that down. We've talked about comms and other ones. I've done a couple with NC Scout, and we'll hit that a little bit more later on. If you have it, you can have a dedicated medical vehicle, right? You can have someone, especially if you have kind of like a passenger van or something with some room, where if someone's got heat exhaustion or something like that, and they need to lay down and need some type of medical attention, you can have more equipment and someone there to handle that if you have it. If not, stick that in the rear vehicle. All right. Excuse me. Let's talk about loadout. So we talked about the roles of the vehicles, roles and duties, responsibilities. Let's talk about loadout basics. So, like I said, you need spare fuel in approved containers, right? You can go and buy that stuff at Walmart or whatnot. Have spare fuel. Have at least one full medical kit with trauma supplies. Everyone should have their own IFAC and basic medical supplies on them. But for the full Monty, at least one vehicle at a minimum has that. And again, it's either in the dedicated medical vehicle or with the rear vehicle. Recovery gear, tow straps, jumper cables. I mean, I think pretty much every vehicle should have jumper cables, but at a minimum, you got to have that stuff. Tire inflator, basic tools, fire extinguisher in every car, right? Food, water, and then weather dependent stuff like blankets. If you're doing this during the cold part of the year, during wintertime or late fall, or depending where you're at in the U.S., right? Things get cold at night or even during the day when you're stopped by. So you need to take into account what the weather situation is and plan accordingly. All right, now that we've got the roles and responsibilities, the organization of the convoy, the load out, let's talk about driving techniques. Let's talk about how we keep this thing together. So, planning and organization is step one, assigning roles and responsibilities is step two, and that gets you before you're rolling out. So when you're doing convoys, and I can tell you this by experience, the bigger the convoy, the more trouble this is, the more of a challenge that is keeping everybody together, right? Assuming that you have a clear flow of traffic and you're able to move and cover a distance, right? There's other vehicles on the road, right? And you have to account for that. It's hard to keep everybody together at a good pace where everyone's maintaining eyes on without causing this accordion effect. And people are going to have a tendency to want to weave in between you, other drivers that are not part of your convoy and stuff like that. So let's talk about how to keep your convoy from falling apart in traffic. So the key point is, and there's really three of them, is you want to be far enough to avoid accidents, right? You don't want to be ramming into each other or things like that on a busy highway, right? So you need to have some kind of spacing, but you want it close enough to prevent other cars from cutting in, right? That's ideal. Is that always going to happen? Probably not. There are going to be times where some little Tesla or Prius or some little car is going to, they're just trying to get up the road a piece. So they're going to kind of weave in and out of your convoy line. So don't sweat it if that happens. Don't be trying to ram up and, cut them off or maybe possibly cause an accident yourself. It's going to happen. The main thing is that you keep eyes on with the other vehicles and maintain communication to avoid getting too far spread out. That's really what you want to do, especially in a civilian context. That's probably the best you can hope for. And that's why, again, I'm going to hit it, communication, having some comms network, also pace planning, right? Because your cell phones may not be usable during that time. So make sure you have a way to communicate. And the big goal there is you just want to at least maintain eyes on the vehicle and have accountability so that nobody gets lost in the sauce, so to say. All right. So what happens if convoy leader is up at the front? He sees there's a nice lane that's open where we can shoot the gap, cover some distance, but we're going to have to pass some vehicles right on the road. So we're going to have to do a lane change. So if you've got 4 or 5 vehicles or more, like how are we going to get everyone to change lanes at the same time, move up the pace, and then get back in the right lane? All right, so a very easy way to do that, it's very simple. The rear vehicle goes first, right? It's exact opposite of what you think. You got your lead vehicle, but when you do a lane change, the rear vehicle goes first. So the rear vehicle will signal a lane change, and he will move first to change lanes, and that blocks traffic. That way, and then you communicate that up, and then the cars or the vehicles in front then make their lane change, right? And it's just like a zipper from back to front, right? Then you move along the line until you get far enough ahead where all the vehicles have cleared, and then the rear vehicle can signal, hey, it's time to get over, and then rear vehicle changes lanes first, right? He gets over, and then everybody zips back into the correct spot, and then we, Charlie Mike, continue the mission. Intersections. If you come to an intersection and you get separated by a light, right? You can either, oftentimes the lead vehicle may just slow down a little bit, get accountability, allow everybody to catch up. If it's really bad, that's what your rally points are for. You can signal, hey, this at rally point Bravo or whatever. That's already located on the map, or if you got to do one on the fly, you can identify one on the map and pass that along through your communication piece, right? The big thing is just don't slam your brakes on in the middle of the road. That's not going to help anybody, right? So for instance, and here's a real world example, and this is military. In Iraq, convoys used what was called rolling blocks with local traffic, right? Civilian groups obviously can't control traffic like that, but the same principle applies. Protect the convoy from getting split up whenever possible. All right. So I've already said I was going to hit comms, so let's talk about that, right? Here's where a lot of folks drop the ball is they assume the cell service will work. And I've already given you examples where that was not the case. So again, you've got to have that layered plan when it comes to your comms. So primary in this day and age are cell phones, right? We can go ahead and check that box. We know that's going to be our primary. That's what everyone has nowadays. So cell phones, group texts, apps, things like that, so that we can communicate. That works really well. For your alternate, maybe you look at having a handheld radio. There, you can get some cheap ones out there. They're legal. They're easy to use. I've already talked about that, like I said, with NC Scout. I've got a link to his primer on the Baofeng radio. You can buy those off of Amazon. They're not expensive, and they've got a pretty good bandwidth that will do you right for convoy operations. And then you've got contingencies, which is prearranged signals, headlights, hazards. I mean, hell, even paper signs in the black glass, if that's all you got. I mean, you just got to use your imagination. The big key with using comms, right, especially radios, is you want to keep the net clear. You want to keep chatter down to a minimum by observing proper radio etiquette. Use brevity codes, right? You don't have to have a long, drawn-out conversation. You can say stop. You can say change route. You can say, hey, we got a breakdown, or things like that. Just keep things simple, all right? All right, let's just go through a simple table talk exercise. We're going to do a scenario walkthrough. Let's say you got 4 cars, you got heavy traffic, and someone has a breakdown of some part, okay? So you've got 4 cars leaving town during an evacuation, and 15 miles out, one of the cars, let's say it's the second car, blows a tire in heavy traffic. All right, so that's passed up the chain. Lead vehicle calls it out on the radio. Car 2, flat tire, rally at point Bravo. So the car 2's got the flat tire, so they're pulling off to the side of the road. Lead vehicle and car 3 will continue on to the rally point and wait to link up with everyone there. The rear car pulls off with the broken down vehicle, helps change the tire, and then gets them back up on the road to link up at the rally point. So no panic, no confusion. Everyone knows the drill because it's been planned and briefed ahead. Pretty simple, right? So it's not rocket science. You don't have to overcomplicate this. So let's talk about some of the mistakes folks make, right? So one would be only one person knows the route. There's no fuel plan, so people run out on the highway. There's another mistake would be there's no comms beyond cell phones, right? Someone, cell phone goes down. Now you don't have comms with at least one of the vehicles, right? Or if comms are down, cell phones are down for everyone, like the Hurricane Katrina incident, right? Not having rally points. So once you get separated, now you really got a boo-boo now, because the arteries are clogged. It's going to be really hard to turn around and try to go find someone, and you're going to lose a lot of time. And especially when you're talking about mass evacuations, things are just going to get worse over time, right? Especially in the beginning, before the authorities can get there and get a handle on the situation and start clearing routes and stuff like that for folks, and controlling traffic. Right. So at the very beginning is when chaos is at its maximum. So having rally points in case you get separated, big ticket item. And then overloading vehicles or not distributing the gear properly, right? Not having the things that you need in the vehicle, right? Based on the role. And we talked about that with roles and responsibilities. So think about that too, right? So proper loadout, right? So if we want just a practical checklist and a summary before you roll out, make sure you've had your briefing, you've discussed your pace plan for the routes and contingencies, right? Make sure everybody is on the same page. Make sure that you've got paper routes with rally points pre-designated along the way, right? Again, comes down to planning. Make sure you have roles that are assigned. Who's the lead, who's the rear, and who's in the main body. Make sure that you have a comms plan with at least at a minimum, your primary and a backup. And then the loadout. Make sure you've got extra fuel. Make sure you have tools you need in case you have a mechanical breakdown or blowout, things like that. Make sure you have medical covered. And then the food and water piece, that needs to be in there too. And then practice it at least once before you need it. Do this safely. Everybody is you're a competent driver. You're all adults, right? So at least walk this through. You don't necessarily have to get in the cars and everything, but you can at least walk this and game it out at a minimum before you do that. Just like when you're doing troop leading procedures before you go out on a mission, of the 8 troop leading procedures, reconnaissance is one of them. And you don't always get to get physical eyes on before you step off. So at the very least, you do a map recon, right? You do rehearsals on the objective. You walk through those things of what you're going to do once you get to the objective. You treat the convoy the same way, right? You do a route recon by map, right? And then you walk through, hey, what are we going to do in case there's a blowout? What are we going to do if someone gets overheated? And at very minimum, talk that stuff out beforehand, before you need it, all right? So wrapping it all up. Like I said in the beginning, convoy ops are not complicated, but when things go wrong, and they will, planning beats panic every time. Plan in advance, work out the kinks now, and not during the actual evacuation, because in real life, you don't get a do-over, right? That's all I've got now. If you're digging this transmission, hit that share button. If you're listening to this on the Substack app, share it with a buddy, or whatever platform you're listening, share it with a buddy and have this conversation now. Start today. And that way you'll be far ahead if catastrophe strikes. Guys, that's all I've got. If you hit me up, let me know what you think about this one. This was kind of like I said, was not one I would have thought of unless it was for that listener that hit me up on X. So feel free to hit me on X or DM me, whatever. Get the message to me. I love hearing from you guys. I appreciate all your support. Again, shout out to my Substack subscribers. I really, really appreciate you. And I appreciate all of the listeners. If you can't support the show financially, man, just giving me a 5-star rating on whatever platform you're listening really helps us, or share it with a friend, help us expand the footprint so we can get this info out. So that's all I've got for this week, guys. I hope you hit it hard, be strong, be safe, and keep it Pearl Snap.